So I want to ask you a question. What were you like as a teenager? Okay, so for some of you that will be a long time ago. For others, maybe not so long. But I want you to think about what you were like as a teenager. Okay? So think about the kind of places you hung out. Think about the kind of friends you had. Think about the kind of music you listened to. Think about the relationship you had with your parents, or not. Anyone have any confessions? Anyone want to share something funny about when they were a teenager? Karen.
I had my parents went away to Montreal, and I had a group of friends, and they sang in a band, and so I had a party at my place that went on totally overnight into the next day and so on. And my parents never found out. I never told them.
Yeah, nice. A lucky one. Anyone else? Anyone else want to give their story? Anyone? Jamie?
I used to do some silly things. And once I sneaked into the Vancouver City Police headquarters with a couple of friends, and we stole the paddy wagon book of arrestees, and it hit the Vancouver Sun the next day, and I didn't know what to do with it then. It's this huge book of all the names of individuals who'd been arrested and booked, and so I hid it in my parents' in the seat of my parents' room.
Well done.
And nobody ever found out.
Wow, that's a great story. Okay, so think about how you were as a teenager, and think about how you are now. Are you different?
Yeah.
Is anyone the same as when they were a teenager? Like mostly the same other than your body got older? Mostly the same. Kathleen's? Yeah? Okay. Change is part of life, and change can be good. And I think God is in the business of change and transformation. Let's look at the world 50 years ago, 1965. The covers of Life magazine. War in Vietnam is increasing, getting larger. This is a picture of a wounded veteran coming out. They're just beginning to be able to image the baby's development in the womb. This was a groundbreaking photo in Life magazine. Cassius Clay, still fighting. Civil rights movement, like we're in the throes of it. Things change. Life changes. We change. God is in the business of change and transformation. So this is the idea that we want to explore today. Change and transformation. It's not the first Sunday we've talked about this, however. We've talked about it for the 3 Sundays beforehand. So Sunday number 1, Easter Sunday, we had this incredible image of Mary at the tomb, and Mary's weeping, and she's angry, and she's frustrated, and she bends down, and she looks into the tomb, and there are 2 white-robed figures there. And then a gardener appears. And in the gardener, she sees Jesus. And we realize that the idea and the works of Jesus are being found in somebody else. That the light which we saw in Christ is now seen in somebody else. Week after, we had this very simple story. The disciples are out, they're fishing on a boat. They're fishing on one side. They fish all through the night. They catch nothing. And Jesus comes the next morning and says, maybe try fishing on the other side. And they do. And there's a change. The nets are full. And last week we had a story of a road to Emmaus. There's Simon and Cleopas. They're walking down the road, and a stranger comes and joins them. And the stranger gets into a conversation with them. I'm trying to figure out what what's just happened in Jerusalem. They invite the stranger to have a meal with them, and in the breaking of the bread, there, they see Jesus again. The light of Christ is seen in this stranger. And we talked about the implications of that it means that the resurrected Christ can be here in this room. So, that's a recap. We have another story of a man on a road, and that's the story that we're going to explore today. But first, we need to do a little bit of setup. So the little bit of setup goes like this. First, we're a little bit past the resurrection stories. Mary in the tomb and the road to Emmaus, we're a little bit past that. The message that Jesus embodied is now beginning to be embodied by a whole group of people called the Way. The term Christian has not yet been coined. Okay, so there's a group of people called the Way, and we have these incredible images of what that looked like. They gathered together. They ate meals together. They devoted themselves to the apostles' teachings. They cared for one another. And as they got bolder and as their numbers grew, they went out and they began healing people. Now, at this point, the religious authorities get very suspicious. And in Acts 5, a few of the apostles are arrested. And they're arrested and brought before the council. And there's this big debate. What do we do with these disciples? Option 1, let them go. They're not doing anything bad. We'll just leave them. Option 2, lock them up for a long time. Who knows how long. Option 3, let's get rid of them. Let's kill them. So they're having this debate. And a wise scholar stands up in their midst, Gamaliel. And Gamaliel says this: "Fellow Israelites, consider carefully what you propose to do to these men. For some time ago, Theudas rose up, claiming to be somebody, and a number of men, about 400, joined him, but he was killed, and all who followed him were dispersed and disappeared. So evidently, there was this man in recent memory named Theudas, and Theudas had some sort of movement going on, and they offed him, and the movement went away." Gamaliel continues. "And after him, Judas," but we're not talking the Judas from the crucifixion story, different Judas. "Judas the Galilean rose up at the time of the census and got people to follow him. But he also perished," nice word, "and all who followed him were scattered." So a second example. There was a person, he had a following, they got rid of the leader, and everything was fine. So in the present case, in the case of these apostles, I tell you, keep away from these men, because if this plan or undertaking is of human origin, it will fail. But if it is of God, you will not be able to overthrow them. In that case, you may even be found fighting against God." She says, if there's nothing to this, if it's a fad, it'll go away. Time will take care of it. But he says, but if this is what God is up to, we don't want to be found working against God. Okay, that's the piece of setup number 1. Setup number 2 is a little bit more controversial. If I say something bad here, it's not intentional. It's tough stuff. So we have Middle Eastern culture 2,000 years ago. And in Middle Eastern culture 2,000 years ago, men were seen at the top of the totem pole. Now, we're desperately trying to change that, but it's still the case in many places, sometimes in North America too. So we have a male-dominated society where the most important thing is your honor. Honor is more important than treasure. Honor is more important than land. Honor is one of the most important things you can have. Being an honorable man means being able to present yourself well. It means that you take care of the people who are underneath you. And so we have this idea that you need to be a man. Like, in some ways, that culture still persists. You need to be the man. Another piece of this is that sight is really important. So if I look at Bruce in culture from 2,000 years ago, that means something. For me to see you means something. And it's where you get this idea of the evil eye, for example. If I look at you and wish ill on you, just the mere sight might actually accomplish that. And so we have these background pieces, all part of the setup. So let's go to the road to Damascus. Saul is there. Saul is a terrible guy. He's presided over the stoning of Stephen, and he has now acquired letters to go to Damascus. And when he goes to Damascus, he's trying to weed out followers of the way. He's trying to crush them, kill them, get rid of them. So here's this man, probably a pretty angry man, but very zealous. And he's walking down the road, probably on a horse, and there's a light. And the light is blinding. And he falls off his horse, and he can no longer see. And he hears this voice, Saul, Saul. Notice the repetition. Why do you persecute me? Looks around, sees no one. He says, who are you, Lord? The voice says, I am Jesus, whom you are persecuting. Now, is Jesus walking around at this point? No. But his followers are. And Jesus is essentially saying, I am in my followers. So there is Saul on the road, unable to see. This scene is against everything that would have been good for Saul. He's kicked off his horse, which is an embarrassing thing, a dishonorable thing. He can no longer see. And the text says right at the end, he has to be led by hand into the city. Like a little child, they lead Saul to Damascus. The change in his life is profound. A few chapters later, all of a sudden they start referring to him as Paul. And he joins the people that he was persecuting. And he becomes one of the most prolific authors of Christian literature. We still read his letters today, all the letters of Paul. God is in the business of change and transformation. But change isn't always easy. I want you to think for a second of a whole bunch of biblical stories that involve change. Think about Abram and Sarai, who are called out of where they're living to a new place. They're called to change. Think about Jacob, who wrestles through the night with God and comes out the other side as Israel. Think about the city of Nineveh, which is seen as this place of debauchery, transformed into a place of faithfulness. Think about baptism. When you go into baptism, you leave behind one life and you take up another. These are all stories of change and transformation. This change is not always easy. Many of you have moved in the last 10 years. Put your hand up if you've moved in the last 10 years. How many of you have moved from at least 100 kilometers away? Many people in our congregation have moved, packed up all their things, and moved to a completely new community. Now, what happens when you're in a new community? New people, new roads, sometimes new licenses if you move from a different province. All sorts of things change. Your house changes, the people you know change, and it's the little things, right? It's like, where did we put the cheese grater? I know it's in a cupboard somewhere, or maybe in a box over there. Everything changes. Why is that so difficult? Loss of power, loss of control. And I think the thing that's most profound is you can go through a time of change, but you never know how you're going to be changed when you come out the other side. It's almost impossible to know. Does anyone remember this? Anyone remember this? So this is a hoopoe. And we used this way back in the fall when we talked about the commandments. And we talked about there were certain animals that were allowed to be eaten and certain animals that were not supposed to be eaten. Right? Anyone remember that? So there are certain things like reptiles that you're not supposed to eat, like no iguanas, no hoopoes, no pigs. Okay? And there are other things that are like good to eat, like steak. Okay? Now, we have a different story today of change as well. So this man, a very faithful man, a Jew, he's been following Jesus for a long time, and his name is Peter. One day, he's hungry, and while he waits for his meal to be made, he goes up onto a rooftop. And while he's there, stomach grumbling, he has a vision. And in the vision, a sheet comes down from heaven. I kind of imagine like squeaky wheels, like ee. And on this sheet are animals. All the animals that he's not supposed to eat. Iguanas, hoopoes, pigs. And the voice says, Peter, go, kill, and eat. But Peter is a faithful man. All his life he's avoided eating these animals. He says, no, I can't. And the voice responds, Peter, if I've made them clean, what's the problem? Happens a few more times, and eventually the sheep goes back up to heaven. Now, on one hand, we have Saul, who in a matter of months goes from hating people in the way to becoming their chief leader. And on the other hand, we have Peter, and he can't even change his diet. Change is not always easy, and yet God is in the business of change and transformation. So I've been thinking a little bit about church communities in this community, and I've been thinking about the fact that many of you have moved here and are new, and I've been thinking about this image. You could use a chain, you could use something like this where hands are all connected together. Now, if we want to invite somebody new into our midst, what do we have to do here? Some people need to let go of their link. A new person needs to be brought in, and new links need to be formed. And that's difficult, and that's challenging work. It means that every time somebody new walks through that door, our community changes again. So I want to finish with this. It's just a goofy way of ending a sermon. How many of you have seen the Red Green Show? Do you remember how they end every single episode? With the man's prayer. Okay? So in the man's prayer, anyone remember what they say? What do they say?
I don't recall what priority. I'm a man, I can change. If I have to, I guess.
Exactly. Yes, well done. So I'm a man, and I can change if I have to, I guess. So if you're not familiar with the Red Green Show, this is it. So all the men are gathered around.
Gather around. Have a seat. Sit down. Sit down.
First they have a pledge.
Quando omni fluncus mortali. Sit down. All right, men, bow your heads for the men's prayer. I'm a man, and I can change if I have to, I guess.
Okay, so God is in the business of change and transformation. And if at all possible, let's embrace that. But it's not always easy. Sometimes it's really annoying looking for the cheese grater. It's really annoying meeting new people. It's really annoying having our heart and our mind transformed. But God is in the business of change and transformation. I would really love to take credit for this next idea, but I can't. It was a concoction of Lauren and I last night. So everyone stand for a second. Okay. You're going to take one hand and put it over your heart. And we're not going to say the man's prayer. We're going to say the church prayer. We're going to say this all together. And you can say it begrudgingly if you want. We're the church, and we can change if we have to. We guess. Okay. Amen.